In our last video, we'll be talking about motor milestones, which are the fundamental motor skills that afford a person the ability to perform coordinated movement patterns later in life. So these do appear in a sequential fashion, right? You can think about like a baby. They have to be able to hold their head up before they can hold their trunk up, before they can sit, before they can stand, before they can walk, right? So while this sequence is predictable, the timing of when things actually appear could be variable from individual to individual because development is an individual process, right? And there are different task and environmental constraints that are also interacting with an infant, particularly an infant's very rapidly changing individual constraints. Bailey and Shirley looked at Bailey and Shirley were researchers that observed infants and then defined the sequence of motor skills and average ages of when those appeared. They first introduced the concept of motor milestones in the 1930s and then later updated these milestones in the 1960s once they had collected more data on a wider range of infants and younger children. There is a table that kind of outlines their milestones and the approximate ages or age ranges that these milestones would occur in. I've put that table in your activity this week, so you can feel free to kind of like copy paste it out of the activity and then use it as a studying resource if you want to. The specific motor milestones and average ages that I want you to know are included in the PowerPoint, but for reference, you do have a larger table. The patterns of acquisition of these milestones can be directly related to predictable changes in individual constraints or rate limiters that occur in typically developing infants. So those might include the maturation of the central nervous system, development of muscular strength and endurance, development of posture and balance, which I think we talked a little bit about individual constraints in like growing limb length as far as like where the distribution of your center of mass is, right? Because babies' heads tend to be large. So as the limbs grow, center of mass changes, which affects posture and balance. And then this also could include improvement of sensory processing and the ability to perceive different sensations within changing environments. There have been some updates to some of the milestones that Bailey and Shirley had originally defined. There was a study done by the World Health Organization in 2006 that sampled like 800 children from 5 different countries, and they observed 6 of the primary milestones, so sitting without support, creeping, standing with assistance, walking with assistance, standing alone, and walking alone. And what they found from that study was that the results from Bailey and Shirley were still relatively supported. There were some small age discrepancies for some of the milestones. So while average ages for milestones may be slightly different from what are presented in the table you have to work off of like this week, the order in which the milestones appear is still fairly predictable. Milestones are going to start in the prone position with chin up and chest up. So usually around 1 month, if you put a baby on on the floor in like a prone position, they should be able to lift their chin up At about 2 months, they should be able to support their body weight a little bit better with their arms, lifting their chest off of the floor. So I can play this video, right? La-di-da. So we could see a rate limiter in the development of a chest-up motor milestone might be muscular endurance, right? You can see maybe this baby started to get fatigued because this chest started to drop. But this would be an important motor milestone, prior to crawling, which also happens with the tummy facing the ground. With regards to sitting and rolling over, usually infants can sit with support around 4 months, but the range is between 1 and 5 months. They can usually roll from their back to front around 6 months, with a range between 4 and 10 months. And they can usually sit without support around 7 months, with a range between 5 and 9 months. Again, we can see this baby rolls over, right? Looks a little bit older than our previous example, but seems to have more muscular strength in moving their body weight around. For creeping and crawling, this usually is going to start around about 8 months. So this is where we start to see more intentional alternating leg and arm movements to locomote from one location to another. Whee! Okay. In terms of standing, this usually starts to appear around 9 months, maybe as early as 5 months or as late as 12 months. Again, it kind of depends on different environmental constraints that are applied. So if you don't give your baby, or if you don't give an infant like a lot of exploration time, or there's not a lot of accessible pieces of furniture or items that are kind of lower to the ground for them to like help pull to standing, that might not occur as soon, right? So average age is about 9 months though, where they have sufficient leg strength to, and also upper body strength to pull themselves, and then support their body weight there. Usually that progresses to being able to stand alone around 11 months, although this could happen as early as 9 months or appear as late as 16 months. So here's an example of this little girl. Sometimes they need some encouragement. All right, but we can see we've got a little bit more coordination. Legs kind of still look awkward, but she's able to use her upper body strength to pull on the furniture and then use her newly found leg muscular strength to push her to a standing position. From standing, we then have walking, right? So stepping movements usually are going to appear around 10 months. This kind of goes along with like, I call it browsing for furniture or browsing furniture. So once infants are able to pull to stand, they usually will like creep along those pieces of furniture. So that's stepping movements or walking with help. It also might apply if they have toys that they can push, right? So this baby has like a little rolly toy that moves when he walks. Usually these are fairly stable, and the wheels don't roll super fast, so it's not gonna like slip out from under them. But walking with help eventually will turn into walking without support. That usually happens at about a year of age. I know my mom said I started walking when I was about 10 months old, so, ranges change, again, based on different task constraints, such as the equipment you provide the infant with and or whatever their environment might afford them to do. I've already kind of started commenting on constraints and how they might affect the attainments of milestones, but I do want to comment on rate limiters, particularly because you'll be working or kind of guessing at what rate limiters could be affecting the development of a certain individual in your activity this week. So rate limiters we kind of introduced in our previous lecture or previous module in relation to the dynamical systems theory, where the slowest developing system acted as a rate limiter for the attainment of a certain type of skill or movement. Rate limiters could encompass individual constraints. I kind of mentioned some of those in our previous video, or kind of at the end of our previous video. So these could be, the maturation of the central nervous system. I have here muscular strength or endurance, right? So if a baby is trying to lift their head or neck, they need sufficient strength in their neck and shoulders to support their body weight. Posture and balance could also be rate limiters, kind of in this individual constraints area, as well as sensory and perceptual systems being developed. Preceding motor milestones and or infantile reflexes could also be rate limiters. So because things happen in a sequential fashion, if an infant does not have the ability to sit alone, it's probably because they maybe haven't attained the milestone to sit with support, right? And they're still working on the control of their trunk. We also have potential psychological or cognitive constraints. So this could relate to like attention or alertness. If we're trying to observe an infant in a certain situation and assess which milestones they have achieved, it's really important to consider like who's conducting the assessment, right? Are they scary? Or is it the parent conducting the assessment and somebody's watching, like through one of those weird windows, mirror thingies? What is the state of the infant in their day? Did they just wake up? Are they ready for a nap? When were they last fed? Okay. This could also apply to maybe negative associations that the infant might have with certain activities. So if they were, pulled up on furniture and were like moving around with that and then bump their head, or if they've fallen many times while trying to walk and they start associating pain with that activity, that psychological constraint or of fear could start to play into if they attain a milestone of walking independently, right? Cultural norms and parent-child rearing practices also play a role in the attainment of motor milestones. So there was, back in 1992, some developmentalists or developmental scientists started to notice that the attainment of, chin-up and chest-up milestones was gradually getting delayed. And it's because there was this method to have infants sleep on their side or their back to reduce sudden infant death syndrome or rates of sudden infant death syndrome. And if infants were spending more time on their backs or in supine, that means they were spending less time in prone, where they were able to practice, pressing or lifting their body weight off the ground. So there was a shift to recommendations of spending 2 to 3 short sessions of tummy time, to keep the infant active in their progression towards their milestones. So different rearing practices also think about different environments. I've mentioned that several times. What types of toys the infant has access to, the accessibility of those toys. So how tall are they in relation to the infant? That's kind of related to the body scaling and affordances conversation we had last week. So there's a lot of different things that can affect the attainment or progression of milestones, which is why we have such a wide range on a lot of a wide age range on a lot of the milestones that I presented, particularly the later ones. So similar to how we used reflexes or infantile reflexes as a method of assessment, looking at the attainment of motor milestones and that sequence in relation to the typical developing child could help us identify possible neurological health disorders or future diseases or atypical development. There are some people who are at greater disadvantages or automatically might have atypical development or delayed onset of certain motor milestones because of their condition. So like individuals with Down syndrome have hypotonia or lack of muscle tone. So that's going to delay their ability to perform reaching or postural control milestones because they don't have that muscular strength to support their body weight. Delays in infant mobility could also have negative effects on cognitive and perceptual development. So if they have decreased exposure to the human object interface, so there's not as many textures that they are exposed to, they kind of miss out on sensory experiences that can help lead to other developmental milestones. So that concludes our lecture for this week. I would go ahead and check out your activity instructions where you can start applying some of these concepts as you observe an infant moving.